Hello! Today we're doing a review of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. How I structure my reviews. We are going to be going over genre, plot, difficulty, writing, pace and structure, building and lore of the world, characters. Lore is more of a fantasy thing, but we'll roll with it. Characters, and for this one, because it's science fiction, we're going to be talking about the science level. So this is the first book in a series of 4 companion novels. I will be reviewing all of these, so when those reviews are up, I will link them below, above, anything. And for all those things I just mentioned, there will be timestamps if I can figure it out. There'll be those cool little bar things. And then in one of the corners, I'll pop what I'm talking about in case you can't be bothered and you just want to scroll through. I'm giving you options. Let's move on. Let's go over genre and the science level of this. So this is obviously a science fiction novel that takes place in space, and the basic premise is that we are on a ship that punches holes into space, and we kind of create wormholes, and so that people can travel between places faster. And that is what we're following, a ship that does that, and we're following all the characters on the ship that do that. Now, what I like about this is that I'm not going to pretend like I know much about that sort of science. I did get a degree in science. It was environmental science. I had to take physics. I took some astronomy. So I have ideas of how things would work, but I don't know the actual hard science. And from my reading of the book, it's very easy to follow. It doesn't go too sciencey, but it's also not breaking laws of physics, which drives me nuts when that happens. So I think it's a good mix of, for people who aren't sciencey and for people who are sciencey, you're not going to get that hard science if that's what you're going for. She's not explaining how people can travel through space and time and how they can punch the wormholes. It's just theoretically possible, and we just know it's possible, so that's what we're doing. This is science fiction, but there's such a blend for me of science fiction and fantasy, and this is where it blends because there are a lot of other species of aliens, I guess, and we're interacting with not just humans, but many other species that are within this world and within this global, kind of the United Nations, of alien species, humans being an alien species as well. So this takes place, of course, very far in the future. We don't know of any alien life, right? We don't know if they're around, if that's real or not. So in theory, it's theoretically possible and theoretically probable that there are other species out there. But she made them up. Becky Chambers made up different types of species. Basically all of them relied on some sort of they all need water, they all need oxygen, I think, for the most part, or they all need to breathe some sort of atmosphere, and they all need to consume some sort of food. And so you can consume foods across species, but everyone needs different things. Some are more reptilian, and so they need, they need warmer climates, that type of stuff. So to me, that's fantasy. She's making up these different types of creatures, but it's from a science fiction perspective. We're saying this is theoretically possible to happen in the future, but we're making up what that what it could look like. This is very light-hearted sci-fi. So it is not super high stakes. It's not intense. Crazy things aren't happening. It is much more you're wearing a warm blanket of sci-fi, while still having stakes. Things happen throughout it that have stakes, so it doesn't make it feel like it's giving something up by giving you something that's more joyous. Let's move on to plot. So I kind of talked about the plot a little bit, but it's really, people always describe this book as plotless, which I don't really know if I agree with. There's a goal. So we have this closed crew of people who are on this ship, and they all work on this ship, and they get a mission, they get a job, and their job is to go out to this new place and they're going to punch a hole and then they're going to come back, and basically because a hole has never been punched there before, there's no wormholes that will get them there quickly, so they have to travel there for a long period of time. Most of this book is them traveling to this new place to do that action, but then they make pit stops. Like, things happen, they end up at a planet, they meet some people, something happens to them in space, they go to a new place. It's like a quest. Like, we have this final goal, and things happen on our way to this goal that kind of impact in some capacity what's going to happen at the end, but not totally. It's more about like the character's journey there. So it feels much more like a quest type of fantasy, but it's sci-fi and we're in space and we're going to a new planet. So I guess I would say that if you're a plot reader and you need everything that's happening to be compounding to the end, like it has to be like building towards something, I don't know necessarily if you'll be disappointed because things are happening, but it's more serial. It's more like, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then we learn this lesson, and then we move forward. So I think that if you're a plot reader, you would still potentially like this because there is plot. It's just not compounding in the same way that I think that people look for in sci-fi fantasy. Let's talk about the audiobook. So I listened to this as an audiobook. This is actually my second time listening to this. I wanted to reread the series because I haven't read the others. And so I reread this one, but they're all companion novels just with like some characters, I think, that kind of correlate to previous stories. So you really don't have to reread them to move on and read the next ones. You could take a lot of time between these books, which maybe I'll do an overall video where I talk about all 4 of them together and do like a guide to the Wayfarers. I don't know if you're interested in that, but we will see if I have the energy to make that video when the time comes. Anyway, back to the audiobook. So it is narrated by Rachel Dulude, and I would say that I thought that the audiobook was good, but I didn't think it was amazing. And that's because there are many consistent characters. So I think that there's 8 people on this ship at all times, if I'm counting correctly. And sometimes the voices were a little bit too similar, so I didn't really know who was talking. It didn't impact my reading substantially, so I would still recommend the audiobook. I still thought it was pretty well done, but if I had to point out a negative, that's what it would be. All right, now let's talk about the writing. I found the writing very straightforward, so like it was really just like there to get the job done and to describe what needed to be described. So I really don't have a lot to say about the writing because that's not really why you read this book. You don't read it because the writing is beautiful. You read it because you're interested in the plot or the characters or some other aspect of the book. Okay, I kind of talked within plot about structure and how it's very serial. And because of that, the pace is one where, like, I read this very quickly, but I feel like you can kind of just read a chapter at a time or read, like, a part at a time. Like, we're on this planet and then we leave, so then you could stop reading it. I feel like you can pick it up and put it down, and kind of because it's not, like, taking that typical structure or maybe the structure that some people appreciate where, like, you know, we're building and we're hitting this climax and we're, like, kind of falling down. It's kind of just, like, things are happening, it's interesting, we hit a climax, and then it kind of ends at the end. Like, there's definitely a climatic moment in this. It's just not, like, built up. It's, like, things happen, it's serialized, and then we have a climatic moment within that, like, serialization. I don't know if that really makes sense, but that's like the best way I can really describe it. Let's talk about the world building. So, like I said in the writing section, this book isn't very descriptive, and so how she accomplishes the world building is by describing things in a way that you already understand them. So there's the world building of like these worlds that they go to, like different planets. She takes things that you already know from Earth, from your life, and she uses those to kind of, as it like to just say it's similar to this, so then you have an idea in your head because you've seen this before. She does that with the world. She also does that with the alien species. There's like mammalian species, there's reptilian species, and I think there was like a third subset of species. And how she always describes the species is in a way where we can, in our head, compare them to a species we're already familiar with on Earth. So it kind of gives us an idea already of what we're looking at, and then she'll kind of like tweak it and like kind of give descriptions that kind of differentiate it from the species that we're used to. And the character is like this human character who comes aboard, Rosemary, who is like kind of the mainish character. She has always lived on Mars, and she's not really seen a lot of other species before. So she's seeing species, and she thinks in her head, like lizard, and then she goes, wait, no, that's just my perception. I'm like, I'm being maybe offensive by thinking those types of things. Like they're not that, they're something different. So it's used as a description, but it's also used as a lesson as you move through it. So yeah, I would say like there's the world building is solid, while not being heavily descriptive. Like we spent a lot of time on this ship, and I can't really tell you what the ship looked like. Like it was described as like a whole, but like I couldn't feel what it felt like to be walking down the hallways or like sitting in certain rooms. She drew your eye to specific aspects, but it wasn't like Tolkien, She wasn't like just heavy description, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, just trying to explain what the book is like. Now, I feel like since I talked about the alien species, we should just kind of move into characters. So this book, as most people say, is character driven, and you have multiple characters, and all of these characters in those like serial moments are kind of learning a lesson. They're learning something about what it means to like have humanity within you, or humanity is very like human centered, which it really talks about in this book. Everyone learns a lesson, like all the humans learn a lesson. Sometimes I think the lessons were like a little bit overdone. It was like a little too much in your face. I think that through Rosemary, who's human, and through Kizzy, who is human, you really get like driven in hard these lessons of growing up and understanding humanity and like being okay and accepting who you are and accepting who other people are. I didn't have to think too much about what the lesson is. It was very much on the nose for the most part. Like she was telling you the lesson she was teaching you, for the most part. And she did this through the humans' interactions with the alien characters. So there's definitely like xenophobia that happens. There's like unintended microaggressions that happen. So a lot of those types of interactions between people are things that are transferable to things that happen in real life, which is kind of the point a lot of the time of science fiction. It's a questioning of humanity, which is in what this book does in some capacity. You learn about religious groups, you learn about like xenophobia, people use slurs, there's different use of pronouns, there's like how different species see each other. It is all transferable to life as it is on Earth, and that was, sometimes, as I said, it was a little too on the nose, but that was like the part of the books that I appreciated the most. I really liked how much she explored these different species, like these different alien species, and how they interacted with their young, and some of them how like they changed genders as they go through time. There was interspecies relationships explored. It was just, that's, if you're reading this book, that's probably what you're reading it for, is that. Another theme that is heavily explored in this is found family. One type of species, androsks, have feather families, which are like found families that they live with or couple with through time. And on the crew, there's this sense of found family, like everyone is in close quarters together. They may not like each other, but there's still some love towards each other. There's definitely an exploration between that with two characters who really don't like each other in a circumstance that they get put through and kind of how they come out of that. Just like what makes someone family. There's also a character who her family did something that she really does not agree with. She's trying to hide that part of her identity because that's her family, and there's this lesson of like your family is not you, and you choose who your family is. Strong found family feels, strong themes around that. Okay, now at the end, let's go into difficulty. I would say with the writing being more simple, easy to follow, the themes of the book being easier to follow and sometimes being on the nose, the age of the characters and the lessons you're learning, and the world building being very straightforward. This is a very good beginner introduction to sci-fi. I think it's like probably a good book that for people who read YA and want to start getting into adult, this is probably a good book to bridge that gap. All reading levels would really be able to handle this. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it to younger children. There's definitely discussions of like sex on the page, but like, I mean, teenagers read that type of stuff. So overall, my final thoughts, I really enjoy this book. I really feel like it's a good, like, it's just a little different. It's exploring science fiction in a way that I don't see happen very often. Not that I read a lot of it. I enjoyed this book. I didn't love this book. It's not my favorite. I prefer when thematic content is a little bit less straightforward. But I did appreciate the book for what it was and would recommend it to people if any of the parts I talked about you found interesting. Okay, I think that's all I got for this video. For those of you that this is the first video that you've watched from my channel, if you made it this far, welcome. I know that my reviews tend to get more watches from non-subscribers than my other videos, so if you're interested in reviews of science fiction and fantasy, I do have a playlist that I will link above and below of other books if you have any interest. Let me know if you've read this book, if you have similar thoughts or different takes on this. I'd be interested to have conversations about that in the comments below. I will be, again, linking the videos to the reviews of the next books as I put them up. And until next time, happy reading!